continues.
We want to welcome Samar Assad, who is the executive director of an organization known as the Palestine Center. And I want to begin by asking you to set up what's going to be happening in January and March. Elections in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem for the Palestinian legislative elections, and then a national election being called in Israel in March. What does this mean?
Well, it's an opportunity. There's going to definitely be some changes in the political landscape in both the Palestinian territories and in Israel. The Palestinian legislative elections, as you said, is scheduled for January 25th. It's the first election in 10 years. The last election was in 1996, along with the presidential elections, where at that time the late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat won the election. This election for the Palestinians is important because for the first time we're going to see members of Hamas running in this election. Although polls show that they won't be the majority, they will have a very comfortable number in the legislative, and that will make them into a very strong, I think, political opposition.
So is the process of trying to negotiate ongoing relations between the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, would President Abbas be bargaining from a position of strength or more weakness following these elections?
I think he probably will be with more strength. I think that this election will prove his ruling party Hamas Fatah will still have a majority, which will then give the impression that he still has the mandate to go ahead and negotiate with Israel. Hamas may present some opposition, but they will not be in the power where they could handcuff him, so to speak, to go ahead with negotiations.
And simultaneously, there will be a campaign and subsequently an election in Israel in March.
Yes. That's also interesting because, as you know, the current Israeli Prime Minister has withdrawn from the Likud Party. He's formed his own political party, taken with him many members of the Likud Party, and Shimon Peres, the former head of the Labour Party, has joined that party. So the Israelis in March have a choice between three actual parties to vote for. They have the Likud Party, which is now being headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. The new Israeli party, I believe it's called Kadima, with Sharon at the head. And then the Labour Party with a new leader, Amir Peretz. So they have a choice between those three potential leaders, parties to run in the elections. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, they were only looking for a party or a government that will choose negotiations over dictations, that will go ahead with the peace process, and towards the end game, which is an independent, viable Palestinian state on 22% of Palestine on the 67 borders, which is the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And that is why it's important that residents of East Jerusalem take part in these legislative elections that are scheduled for January.
You can join in the discussion. We've divided our phone lines for those of you who support President Bush or Democrats or others. You can also email us at journal@cspan.org. Looking at it from your standpoint with the split with the Likud Party and now Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a former Israeli Prime Minister, now running running to be the next Prime Minister, could that just split the conservative vote in Israel to allow a labor government in Israel? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think so. I strongly believe that Sharon will win the election. The Likud, those left with the Likud are the very conservative hardliners. Benjamin Netanyahu.
One of those used to be Ariel Sharon.
Yes, and you know, for the sake of argument, I still think he still is a conservative hardliner. I mean, his positions have not changed dramatically. I mean, his withdrawal from the Gaza Strip was a unilateral decision. He did not negotiate that with the Palestinians. He has made it very clear. He has put conditions regarding final status talks. That is, no withdrawal from Jerusalem, no withdrawal to the 1967 borders, and he wants to keep major settlement blocks in the West Bank, which will divide the West Bank into 4 areas, and thus threatening the viability of a Palestinian state. So with that, we have a very very hardliner with Benjamin Netanyahu running the Likud. We have a new leader for the Labour Party that's been basically defeated and damaged. He has no political experience in the sense of negotiating with the Palestinians. He's not a decorative soldier like Barak was when he won the election for Labour against Netanyahu in the 1990s. So his position, I think, is a little bit still weak. Given the three choices, I think a lot of Israelis will go with Sharon, feeling that he wants to move on the Palestinian track. Now, the way he wants to move, that's a different set of questions and arguments, but they feel that he wants to move on some kind of settlement with the Palestinians, but at the same time, they've seen his hand when it comes to the security, quote-unquote, for the Israelis.
By the way, the Washington Times reporting on a meeting that took place between Pope Benedict XVI and Mahmoud Abbas, in which he was invited to visit the Middle East, and the Pope reportedly told President Abbas, or the Palestinian leader, Mr. Abbas, that he responded favorably, although no definite date has been set for a possible visit by the Pope. Galva, Illinois, good morning.
Good morning. I don't think most people know that when you say the 22%, that actually conforms to the 1967 borders.
Yes.
And while I do think it's a major achievement that the 7,500 settlers have left the Gaza Strip, I think it would be a cruel joke if the momentum died and we didn't concentrate on the 400,000 settlers in the West Bank. And plus the military outposts, the crosshatches of military outposts, access roads, and just spots of settlements across the West Bank that kind of divide the Palestinian people from themselves and from their means of providing their own sustenance.
Thanks for the call. Los Angeles, good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
Morning.
My question is, do you believe that, related to the last call, that Palestine or the Palestinians are willing to give up any of the land that Israel captured?
Well, for the first caller, yes, we did see the footage of the 8,000 settlers being evacuated from Gaza Strip, but let's just keep in mind that those 8,000 are a very, very small percentage of the 440,000 the caller mentioned. These settlers were there illegally in illegal settlements on confiscated Palestinian land in occupied Palestinian territory. So their evacuation is, sort of speak, a very, very small percentage in trying to fix a major violation of international law. And with the opening of Rafah, the issues in Gaza are not over. You know, that's one issue of a crossing. You still have the airport. They need to reopen the airport. You need to get started on construction of a port, a land link between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, because with Rafah, you have Palestinians being able to leave the Gaza Strip to Egypt and to the outside world, but Palestinians don't have access from one occupied part of the west of the Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip, to another, the West Bank, because there is no land link there. There's also an issue of all the economic viability that the seaport, the airport, and then the land link will provide the Palestinians. And most importantly, currently, the Gaza Strip is a labor-oriented market, and a lot of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip rely on work in Israel. And they don't get to Israel through the Rafah crossing. They get to Israel through the Erez crossing, which is in the northern West Gaza Strip that controls the passage from Gaza to Israel, which Israel is in control. So there are several issues that still need to be dealt with, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And then, of course, this is all before you get to the final status talks. I think these issues in Gaza could be dealt with now. The final status issues, of course, we will have to wait for after the Israeli elections to see which government is coming in, and that's when we have to deal with the issue of Jerusalem, settlements, borders, and the final state and what shape and form it's going to be. As far as giving up land, we've already given up 78% of historic Palestine. We've recognized Israel's right to exist on 78% of historic Palestine. We're asking for an independent state, a viable independent state on only 22% of Palestine. And to give up more of 22% will not create a viable independent state. And let's not forget that on that 22%, Israel still has settlements. It's creating a separation wall. All of this is robbing the Palestinians of land, of prime agricultural land, water aquifers, and connection between one part of the West Bank and the other, and from the West Bank to the outside world, Jordan and Gaza. So there is no room to give up any more land.
We are talking to Samar Assad, who is the Executive Director of the Palestine Center. And over this next call, courtesy of Google Earth, we'll show you the area that we're talking about, particularly the Middle East, Israel, and the Palestinian territory. Laguna Niguel, California is our next caller. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, Israel is a terrorist organization. There is no such thing as Israel. It is a terrorist organization set up by terrorists from 5 governments: China, United States, Britain, France, and Russia, which are all owned by Zionism years ago. China is your main ingredient of Zionism, and they are the ones who are going to take the world for themselves. Palestine needs to have all their country back. You cannot have 22%. Thank you.
Thank you. Arkansas past Texas. Good morning to you. Question or comment? Go ahead.
Good morning, Steve, and it's Aransas, but that's okay.
Aransas, I'm sorry.
Ms. Assad, for
Yes.
some reason, you're not mentioning the disarmament of either Hezbollah or any of the other militant groups that the Palestinians are supposed to disarm, and the fact that the Arabs 4 times attacked Israel, and you talk about occupied land, it's like they lost it in a war. Thank
you.
Well, first of all, let's make something very clear. We have nothing to do with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a resistance movement in Lebanon. It's been fighting the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. As far as disarming groups in the Palestinian territory, President Abbas has said from the very beginning that there will be only one rule and one gun. There has been a ceasefire, a hudna, in place for several months now, for 8 to 9 months since he took office. And even before he took office, when he was prime minister, he brokered a ceasefire between the militant groups, asking them not to launch any operations against Israel. There is also an agreement among the factions with the Palestinian Authority, with President Abbas, that there will be no show of guns or arms during the elections or after the elections. There are no showing of guns in parades or celebrations of groups, and that has all been agreed upon. Sure, there's still more to be done on that front, but the Palestinian Authority has taken many steps on the security level, from consolidating the security forces into 3 and brokering an agreement with the groups, the armed groups.
Our guest is a graduate of San Francisco State University, and before joining the Palestine Center as the executive director, she worked as a reporter based in the region for the Associated Press. Next call is Kansas City, Missouri. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is very simple. Has the involvement of the United States, has it made it more complicated to the Palestine nation? Has it got it more complicated?
Thank you.
As far as U.S. involvement, in the beginning of the Bush administration, the Bush administration decided not to get involved or to get directly involved, and that did complicate things. What further complicated things at that time was in April of 2004, when President Bush basically reversed decades of U.S. policy when he stood by Ariel Sharon in the White House and agreed with Sharon's demands that the settlement blocks remain in the West Bank, that there is no return of the Palestinian refugees, there's no return to 1967 lines. So that complicated things. I think that the Bush administration now, with the U.S. Secretary of State's involvement with the Rafah agreement, realized that that direct engagement by the United States is important for progress, and that once the United States shows a political will and looks at things in the way of what is needed for peace rather than what the Israeli government or is possible for the Prime Minister, that there is actual progress. So we hope that they continue with this line of thinking.
And if you're interested, Charles Krauthammer, in his syndicated column that appeared Friday in the Washington Post, says progress in the Middle East in the absence of peace signing ceremonies and handshakes. He says there has been amazing recent progress in diffusing the Arab-Israeli dispute. That appeared Friday in the Washington Post. Glendive, Montana, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Good. My question is that it's my understanding that the Christians and the Jews generally think that the Bible tells them they must protect the land of Israel, and that the Quran and the Muslims generally feel that they have to obliterate this area. And if you could speak on that a little, they need to take it over. I mean, this has been going on. I see the funny look on your face, but this has been going on for a long, long time.
I think it's important to look at this issue as a political issue and not a religious issue. This is a political issue. Jerusalem is the holy capital of the three religions, and it can be shared and accessed by all three religions, I think, in an equal and fair manner. But this is a political problem. This is a problem about on self-determination, identity, and I think the last thing that we should look at it is through the prism of religion and whose land it is and whose promised land it is. It's not an issue of God working as a real estate agent. This is a political issue where people's future and survival is in question here.
Hackensack, New Jersey, good morning.
Good morning, Samar.
Good morning.
I think that a viable independent state as a two-state solution is just not. I can't envision it. It's not practical and it's not going to work. It's an issue for President Bush to say it 4 or 5 years ago and to come up with it as a first president to announce a Palestinian state. He himself knows it's not going to happen. In my opinion, the only way out for Israel out of this mess is a one secular state solution for two people, and I hope that the Palestinian, the PA will not abandon the Palestinian refugee issue. That I haven't been hearing about it, not even one time during your discussion this morning. If you don't mind to raise it up, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Given the way things are going right now, there is a lot of concern that a two-state solution is no longer viable because of Israel's settlements in the West Bank and its wall and other issues. There has been some kind of discussion on the Palestinian side that maybe then we should have a one-state where everybody's equal. This is something that scares the Israelis, because once the Palestinians start talking about a one-state with equal citizenship and equal rights, the Israelis come and say, you want to destroy the Jewish character of Israel. So they don't want to go for a one-state, yet at the same time they're creating facts on the ground that is making a two-state solution impossible. They're sealing off Jerusalem with a wall and settlements from the West Bank. It's already sealed off from the southern West Bank, from the area of Bethlehem, and they're now building settlements and walls to seal it off from the northern West Bank. The separation wall has taken up a lot of land in the areas of Qalqilia, and they're still continuing to expand settlements both in the central, south, east, and west of the West Bank, making, again, a viable Palestinian state as a two-state solution impossible, yet they're not willing to go for the one-state solution.
Castro, California is next. Good morning. Castro Valley, California, I should say.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just had a comment that I feel like if the Palestinian government would be seen as cracking down on the terrorists, the suicide bombers and all, there would be a lot more sympathy for them. You know, I think the majority of people believe that the Israelis were forced on to the Palestinians, and there would be sympathy. But they end up feeling sorry for the Israelis due to all the terrorists. So I just wanted the young lady's comment on or explain.
Thank you.
That.
I'll let your comment stand. We'll go on to San Diego. Did you want to respond?
I didn't quite hear what he...
Well, he was basically saying that the people are feeling sorry for the Israeli because of the terrorist attacks by the Palestinians.
Well, I mean, all I can say is that there's an occupation that's going on there, and people have a right to resist that occupation in whatever means at their disposal. I'm not saying that I'm for suicide bombings. I'm just saying that given the balance of power, the Palestinians don't have F-16s, Merkava tanks, and they're under occupation. I think what's needed for people to realize that defense is not the same as security, and once you end the occupation, you will really eliminate the source or the root cause of such attacks against Israel.
If you want to get more information, the website is PalestineCenter.org. You can log on. It's also available through C-SPAN's website. San Diego is our next caller. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I'd like to ask why you think that America really does not have any idea who Rachel Corrie is, and why there's so much information about Israel when Israel gets attacked, but the opposite is almost never true.
It's a shame, yes, that the story of Rachel Corrie is not more front and center in the United States. Rachel Corrie is a young American peace activist who was crushed to death by a Caterpillar bulldozer while she was trying to protect a home of a Palestinian in Gaza Strip from being demolished. And it's sad that the stories of these young Americans who go over there, who see the injustice, and try to tell the Palestinian people that we are with you and our foreign policy is one thing, and the American people and their beliefs is another. And I really do think that her story should be more front and center. And it's a shame that it's not. But her story is very dear to the Palestinians. There was a school named after her. We try to keep her memory alive in any way and in any time we see that we can.
For Samar Assad, next caller is Boston. Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you really feel that the president can control Hamas? I spent several years in the IDF, and my area of operations was Ramal.
You mean Mahmoud Abbas or President Bush?
I'm just wondering if President Abbas can actually control Hamas.
Thank you.
I think he can, but there's a difference between what the Israeli government and sometimes some U.S. officials define as controlling. President Abbas and the Palestinian people will never stand for a civil war, and I think that's what the Israelis and the U.S. administration, or some in the U.S. administration, has been pushing President Abbas to do in terms of how he deals with them and crackdown. But President Abbas has taken the option of national dialogue. He has encouraged them, and I feel that this step, the fact that they're taking part in the legislative elections, is a very positive step, that they are coming into the political process, which will then kind of distance them a bit from the military option and from any kind of internal fight with the Palestinian Authority. There is no Palestinian official who would ever push for a civil war by forcing the disarmament of any armed group. There are laws that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian legislature have put in that the revamped security services are fulfilling, and it's through the rule of law, that these groups will come into under the law and under, let's say, the control of President Abbas or the Palestinian Authority, but not through civil war.
And again, those elections set for January 25th. Next call is Chandler, Arizona. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I tell Samar Sabah al-Khair?
Sabah al-Noor, ahlan.
Okay, now I want... Go ahead.
No, we're waiting for your question. Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, what I want to comment is one of the callers said if the American policy is affecting the region in negative way. Unfortunately, yes, because the American policy is just going to the favor of the Israelis in a blind way, where the Palestinians have or no more trust the American policy.
But let me take that caller's point. Has it changed in the last 6 to 8 months?
Not in a significant way. There should be more by the U.S. administration. I think that, as I said, the step in Rafah is a positive step, but it's a very small step. The agreement that Secretary Rice brokered leaves vague and for uncertainty several issues in the Gaza Strip, such as the airport and the seaport and the land link. It's also important to note that while there is Palestinian control over the Rafah crossing, 2 days ago we heard the Israeli defense minister saying that if the Palestinians don't perform well in Rafah, we will close down areas. So we can't have this kind of threat dictates imposed on the Palestinians, and this is where the U.S. administration needs to come in. I think the next test for the U.S. administration will be these elections. The Israeli government has threatened to arrest or take several actions against candidates such as those from Fatah and other candidates that they think are not suitable. And that will be something that will sabotage these elections, something that the Palestinian Authority and people can't afford, and I think the whole region can't afford. These elections need to run, they need to run smooth, they need to run fair, and the United States will have to make sure that Israel does not interfere in these elections.
Long Island is our last caller for Samar Assad. Good morning.
Good morning. I have a couple of questions for Mrs. Assad. She had stated that she believed that Israel had a right to exist. If that's the case, how come she didn't correct the previous caller who called Israel a terrorist state and that had no right to exist as a Jewish state? Also, how come Palestinians have not confronted Hamas and the other Islamic? She calls it a political issue, but it is clearly a religious undertones.
Again, like I said, regarding the confrontation, quote unquote, with Hamas, President Abbas has taken the direction and the option of a national dialogue to bring them into the Palestinian Authority, into the political mainstream of Palestinian life. He has insisted on a one gun, one rule, which so far everybody has been respecting. As far as the other caller, that's his opinion. I said that the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1988, when it declared a Palestinian state on the 67 borders, it recognized Israel's right to exist. The Palestinian Authority has been negotiating with the State of Israel since 1993 till today. It's actually the Israelis who haven't really come out and recognized our right to exist. And so that should be the question. And yes, Israel was created through, let's say, quote-unquote terrorist acts. There were many armed militias, Jewish armed militias, that led to the creation of the Jewish state. But we are talking about today. We're saying that the Palestinians have recognized Israel's right to exist on 78% of historic Palestine, and we want to create our state, our independent state, side by side with Israel on 22% of Palestine, and it's up to the international community to make sure that this happens and that Israel abides by that.
Our guest is the Executive Director of the Palestine Center, Samar Assad. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
President Bush heads back from Camp David later today. He attends the Kennedy Center honors tonight, and tomorrow he travels to North Carolina, where he will be talking about the economy. Tomorrow morning on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, which gets underway every day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 o'clock for those of you on the West Coast. We'll have a conversation with Stephen Henderson, who has a piece this weekend in night-reader newspapers around the country on the records of Supreme Court nominee Samuel Alito, 311 documents. You can read about it at the Philadelphia Inquirer website, and he'll be here tomorrow to talk about his judicial record, his decisions, and his writings. And Andrew Krapenovich, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, to talk about the President, the war in Iraq, and the redeployment of troops in that part of the world. We thank you for being with us on this Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a great week ahead.